My name is Nora, 34 years old, and I live in a modest duplex on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. I'm a landscape designer, not the kind who shapes sprawling estates, but the one who sketches community gardens and small backyard oases for families who want a patch of green to call their own. My hands are often smudged with soil, my desk cluttered with graph paper and plant catalogs. For the past 4 years, I shared my life with Julian, a man whose easy laugh and steady presence made me believe in forever. I never imagined the worst moment of my life would unfold in the middle of a neighborhood festival. I'd spent months planning, surrounded by people I thought knew me. It was a warm September evening, the kind where the air smells like cedar, and the sky glows pink over the Blue Ridge Mountains. I'd poured my heart into organizing the Crestwood Harvest Festival, a yearly event for our tight-knit community. I'd designed the layout myself, strings of Edison bulbs draped over wooden booths, wildflower arrangements on every table, and a small stage for local musicians. My pride was the community garden I'd built over the summer, a mosaic of raised beds where kids planted sunflowers and retirees grew tomatoes. The festival was my gift to Crestwood, a way to say, "This is home." I wanted it to be perfect. Julian had been my biggest cheerleader, or so I thought. He'd spent weeks helping me hammer signs into the grass and haul tables from the community center. "This is your moment, Nora," he'd say, his hazel eyes crinkling. "You're making this place better." I believed him. I invited about 50 people, neighbors, clients, my closest friend Tessa, and even Mara, a florist I'd collaborated with on projects. Julian always said Mara was just a contact, someone he'd met through work. I had no reason to doubt him. The festival kicked off at 5:00 p.m. Families wandered through the booths, kids clutched cotton candy, and a folk band strummed on stage. I wore a navy linen dress, my hair loose, a small clay pendant around my neck, a gift from Julian last Christmas shaped like a fern leaf. It was my talisman, a reminder of the life we were building. I was nervous but buzzing with pride. Tessa, who knew I'd been feeling off for weeks, gave me a knowing look. She was the only one I'd told about the pregnancy test I'd taken in her bathroom, the 2 pink lines that felt like a secret too big to hold. I planned to tell Julian tonight after the festival when we were alone. Maybe I'd even tell the crowd if the moment felt right. By 7:30, the garden was packed. I was refilling a pitcher of lemonade when Julian climbed onto the stage, tapping the microphone. The crowd hushed, faces turning toward him. He looked sharp in his flannel shirt sleeves, rolled up his smile wide and warm. "Hey, everyone," he began, his voice carrying over the hum of chatter. "I want to say something about Nora, the woman who made all this happen." My heart leapt. I set down the pitcher, wiping my hands on my dress, and stepped closer to the stage. Tessa grabbed my arm, her nails digging in, but I barely noticed. "Nora's been my rock," Julian continued, his eyes finding mine. "She's poured everything into this festival, into this community. But tonight, I have something for her, something she deserves." The crowd murmured, a few people clapping. My chest tightened. Was this it? Was he going to propose? We'd never talked about marriage, not explicitly. But I was carrying his child. Maybe he'd sensed it. Maybe this was his way of stepping up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, no bigger than a deck of cards carved with a simple vine pattern. My hands shook as I took it, the crowd's eyes on me. I smiled, nervous, and lifted the lid. Inside was no ring, no sweet note, just a single folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, my fingers clumsy, and read the words scrawled in Julian's handwriting. "I'm done. You're not enough. I'm moving on. Good luck." The world tilted. The pendant at my neck felt like it was burning my skin. I looked up, searching Julian's face for some sign this was a mistake, but his expression was cold, his jaw set. "It's over, Nora," he said into the microphone, his voice flat. "I tried, but I can't keep pretending. I'm leaving." He stepped off the stage, brushing past me like I was a stranger. The crowd gasped, then fell silent. A few people laughed, thinking it was a prank, but the laughter died when they saw my face. Tessa was at my side in an instant, snatching the note from my hand. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, reading it. Julian didn't look back. He walked straight to Mara, who was standing near a booth, her face pale but unsurprised. She didn't meet my eyes as they left together, disappearing into the dusk. I stood there, the box still in my hand, the note now crumpled in Tessa's fist. The band started playing again, hesitant as if trying to fill the void. People whispered, some approached me with awkward condolences. "Nora, are you okay?" But their words blurred into noise. My stomach churned, not just from the pregnancy, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen, as someone who could be discarded so publicly. I wanted to scream, to run, but instead, I forced a smile, thin and brittle. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice barely audible. "Let's keep the festival going." That night, after the last booth was packed away, I sat alone in my duplex, the clay pendant on the coffee table, like a relic of a life that no longer existed. Tessa had stayed until midnight, cleaning up paper plates and muttering about Julian's cowardice. "He's a spineless jerk," she said, tossing a stack of napkins into the trash. "You're better off." I nodded, but I didn't believe her. Not yet. I hadn't told Julian about the baby. He didn't know I'd seen the late-night texts he'd sent Mara glimpsed on his phone when he left it on the counter. He didn't know I was the kind of woman who could rebuild from ash, not because I wanted to prove him wrong, but because I had to for myself and the life growing inside me. The morning after the festival, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Tessa banging pots in my kitchen. My duplex felt too quiet, otherwise the kind of silence that amplifies every thought you're trying to avoid. I hadn't slept much, just a few broken hours on the couch, the clay pendant still sitting on the coffee table, like a weight I couldn't lift. My phone was off. I couldn't face the notifications, the pity texts, or worse, the silence from people who didn't know what to say. I was 10 weeks pregnant, and the man who was supposed to be my partner had turned me into a public spectacle. But lying there staring at the ceiling, I felt something else stirring, a stubborn, quiet resolve. I wasn't going to let Julian's cruelty define me. Tessa shoved a mug of decaf into my hands. "Drink," she ordered, her curly hair tied back, her eyes sharp, with the kind of loyalty that doesn't need words. Tessa ran a pottery studio down the street, her hands always dusted with clay, her voice blunt but warm. She'd been my anchor since I moved to Asheville 5 years ago, the one who dragged me to trivia nights when I was too shy to make friends. "You're not hiding in this house, Nora," she said, sitting across from me. "That jerk doesn't get to ruin you." "I'm not ruined," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I need to figure out what's next." I told her about the texts I'd seen on Julian's phone a month ago, late-night messages to Mara, vague, but flirty, signed with a single flower emoji. I'd brushed them off, convincing myself I was paranoid. Now they were neon signs I couldn't unsee. Tessa's jaw tightened. "You should have told me," she said, but her tone wasn't accusing. "What else do you know?" I hesitated, then pulled out my laptop. I hadn't planned to dig, but after Tessa left last night, I'd gone through my email, searching for anything I'd missed. Julian and I had shared a credit card for household expenses, and I'd found a statement buried in my spam folder. The charges weren't huge, but they were telling $127 at a wine bar in downtown Asheville, $89 at a boutique hotel an hour away, $45 for a florist, not Mara's shop, but another one. The dates lined up with nights Julian said he was working late at his carpentry job. I showed Tessa the PDF. "He wasn't just leaving me," I said. "He was building a whole other life." Tessa leaned back, exhaling. "Okay, so he's a liar and a coward. What do you want to do about it?" It was the question I'd been avoiding, but her directness forced me to face it. I could have cried, screamed, or called Julian to beg for answers, but none of that felt right. I thought about the baby, the tiny heartbeat I'd seen on an ultrasound screen 2 weeks ago, alone in a doctor's office. This child deserved a mother who didn't crumble. "I want control," I said finally, "of my home, my money, my life. He doesn't get to walk away and leave me scrambling." That afternoon, I called a locksmith. A woman named Diane, with a no-nonsense voice and a toolbox slung over her shoulder, arrived within the hour. She changed the locks on my front and back doors, checked the windows, and handed me a pamphlet about affordable security cameras. "You live alone?" she asked, not prying, just practical. I nodded my hand, brushing my still flat stomach. "Not for long," I said, and she gave me a small, understanding smile. I paid her with my debit card. The joint card with Julian was already frozen, something I'd done at 2:00 a.m., while Tessa snored on my couch. Next, I called my bank. The duplex was in my name, only I'd bought it with a small inheritance from my grandmother, but Julian had contributed to utilities. I unlinked his name from the accounts, opened a new savings account for the baby, and transferred half the joint account's balance to it. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't want Julian's money tied to my future, not when I knew he'd spent it on lies. By evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "I'll come by tomorrow to grab my stuff. Leave the door unlocked." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. The old Nora would have complied, avoiding conflict, hoping for closure. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I typed back, "No. You'll get your things with witnesses. I'm not doing this alone." He didn't respond, but I felt a spark of power in my chest. For the first time in 24 hours, I wasn't reacting, I was deciding. Tessa stayed over that night, sprawled on an air mattress in my living room. We didn't talk much, just watched a mindless cooking show until I could pretend to sleep. Around 3:00 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table, the pendant in my hand. It was smooth, cool, the fern shape etched with care. Julian had given it to me after a hiking trip, saying it reminded him of my love for growing things. Now it felt like a lie, but I didn't throw it away. Instead, I slipped it into a drawer next to my sketchbooks. I'd decide what to do with it later. The next morning, I called my cousin Marcus, a part-time barista with a knack for staying calm under pressure. He was 27, lanky, with a quiet intensity that made people listen. "I need backup," I told him. "Julian's coming by, and I don't trust him to keep it civil." Marcus didn't ask questions. "I'll be there," he said. I also texted Tessa's friend Calvin, a landscaper who'd worked with me on the community garden. Calvin was built like a linebacker with a deep laugh and a protective streak. "Say the word Nora," he texted back. "I've got your back." When Julian's truck pulled into my driveway at noon, I was ready. I sat on my couch sketching a new garden layout, my pencil steady. Tessa opened the door, Marcus and Calvin flanking her. Julian froze, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "What is this?" he said, his voice sharp. Calvin crossed his arms, smiling faintly. "Just making sure things stay smooth. Take your stuff and go." Marcus held up a clipboard with a list. I'd made 2 boxes of clothes, a toolbox, a lamp. "Sign here when you're done," he said, his tone flat. Julian looked at me, his eyes narrowing like he expected me to flinch. I didn't. "This is my home," I said, not raising my voice. "You made your choice. Now take your things and leave." He opened his mouth, then closed it, Tessa's glare cutting through him like a blade. He grabbed the boxes, signed the clipboard, and walked out. As the door closed, I exhaled, my hand resting on my stomach. The baby wasn't kicking yet, but I felt a pulse of something, maybe hope, maybe defiance. I wasn't just surviving Julian's betrayal. I was building a life without him. That night, I opened my laptop and created a new email account, norasnewstarteggmail.com. I forwarded the credit card statement, the screenshots of Julian's text to Mara, and a photo I'd found on Mara's Instagram, a selfie at the wine bar, Julian's reflection in the glass behind her, wearing the jacket I'd bought him. I didn't send them anywhere, not yet. They were my insurance, proof of the truth Julian thought I'd never see. Then I pulled out a fresh sheet of graph paper and wrote at the top, Plan, Protect, Build, Thrive. I didn't know every step, but I knew the first one I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small again. The weeks after Julian left felt like walking through fog, everything familiar, but blurred heavy. I was 12 weeks pregnant, my body starting to shift in ways I couldn't ignore, a slight curve to my stomach, a constant hum of nausea. Work kept me grounded. I'd spend mornings sketching garden layouts for a new client, a retired couple in West Asheville, who wanted a butterfly sanctuary. My pencil moved steadily across graph paper, plotting paths for lavender and milkweed, but my mind kept circling back to the festival, to Julian's note, to Mara's averted eyes. I wasn't angry anymore, not exactly. It was something deeper, a quiet ache for the Nora I'd been, before I learned how easily trust could shatter. Tessa noticed the change. "You're too quiet," she said one afternoon, tossing a clay-stained rag onto her studio table. We were at her pottery shop, a cozy space filled with half-glazed mugs and the earthy smell of wet clay. I was helping her sort orders, mostly to keep my hands busy. "Quiet's fine for some people, Nora, but not you. You're the woman who convinced a whole neighborhood to plant a garden. Talk to me." I shrugged, stacking a box of bowls. "I'm just processing. I don't want to be the person who falls apart." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "You're not falling apart. You're building something new, but you don't have to do it alone." Her words stuck with me, and a few days later, I signed up for a prenatal class at the community center near Biltmore Village. It was a small group, mostly first-time moms, led by a woman named Ruth. Ruth was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair, and a voice that felt like a warm blanket. She was a retired nurse who'd raised 3 kids alone after her husband left her for a better option, as she put it. During our first class, while we practiced breathing exercises on yoga mats, Ruth shared her story without a trace of bitterness. "Pain doesn't define you," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "It's just the soil you grow from." I felt a lump in my throat, not because I was sad, but because she saw me, really saw me, without knowing my story. After class, I lingered, helping Ruth stack chairs. "You're carrying more than that baby," she said, not looking up. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, then told her about the festival, the note the baby Julian didn't know about. I didn't mention Mara or the credit card statements. I wasn't ready to unpack that, but Ruth didn't push. Instead, she handed me a small, smooth stone from her pocket, etched with the word root. "A reminder," she said. "You're not starting over. You're growing deeper." I slipped the stone into my purse next to my keys and carried it everywhere after that. It wasn't the clay pendant, but it felt like a new kind of anchor. Ruth's class became my weekly refuge. I learned about childbirth, sure, but more than that, I learned to listen to myself again. The other moms shared their fears about money, about being enough, and I realized I wasn't alone in feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. One evening, while we sipped herbal tea, Ruth asked us to write down one thing we wanted for our babies. I wrote, "I want you to know you're enough, no matter who tries to tell you otherwise." I didn't share it out loud, but when I looked up, Ruth was watching me with a quiet nod. Work picked up too. The butterfly garden project was a success, and the couple referred me to a local school that wanted a sensory garden for their special needs program. It was a big contract, enough to cover my expenses through the baby's first few months. I threw myself into it, sketching paths lined with soft grasses and fragrant herbs. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of Mara's florist shop when I drove through downtown. Her sign, Bloom and Vine, was painted in cheerful yellow, a mocking contrast to the knot in my chest. I hadn't confronted her, hadn't even spoken to her since the festival. Part of me wanted to storm and demand answers, but another part, the part that was learning to root itself, knew that wasn't the way. Then, one Saturday morning, the confrontation found me. I was at the farmer's market, picking out apples for a pie I planned to bake with Tessa. My hair was in a messy bun, my hand resting on the small swell of my belly, the root stone in my pocket. I turned a corner, And there she was, Mara standing at a booth selling wreaths, her dark hair pulled back, her smile faltering when she saw me. For a moment we just stared, the hum of the market fading into white noise. I could have walked away, but my feet stayed planted. "Nora," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. I didn't expect to see you." I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, I bet." My tone wasn't harsh, just tired. She glanced at my stomach, her eyes widening, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I owe you an apology. I didn't know things were that serious with you and Julian. He told me you were drifting apart, that you were okay with him moving on. I should have asked you directly." Her words hit like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were so flimsy. I thought of the text, the wine bar, the hotel charges. Mara wasn't innocent, but she wasn't the villain either, just another piece of Julian's lie. I took a breath, feeling the stone in my pocket grounding me. "You didn't ask, because you didn't want to know," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm not here to fix your guilt, Mara. I'm here to live my life." Her face crumpled, and for a second I thought she'd cry. Instead, she nodded, clutching her wreath. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then turned away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there, my heart pounding, but not breaking. The encounter didn't heal me, but it clarified something. Mara's betrayal wasn't about me. It was about her own choices, her own blindness. I bought my apples, drove home, and baked that pie with Tessa, the kitchen filled with the warm smell of cinnamon. We didn't talk about Mara, but Tessa squeezed my shoulder as we ate, her way of saying she knew I'd crossed a threshold. That night, I got a text from Julian. "Can we talk? I want to explain. Black Mountain Coffee, tomorrow, 10 a.m. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering. He didn't know about the baby. Didn't know I'd seen Mara. Didn't know I was already rewriting my story without him. I thought about Ruth's stone, about the garden I was building, about the baby who deserved a mother who chose strength over chaos. I replied, "Okay, but this is on my terms." I wasn't sure what I'd say, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let Julian's words rewrite my truth again. The next morning, I walked into Black Mountain Coffee at exactly 10:00 a.m., the rootstone in my pocket, my sketchbook tucked under my arm like a shield. The cafe was tucked off a quiet street in Asheville, its windows fogged from the autumn chill, the air thick with the scent of espresso and cinnamon. I chose a corner table near a bookshelf where I could see the door but feel tucked away. My navy sweater hid the slight curve of my belly, and I'd tied my hair back, wanting to look composed, not fragile. Julian didn't deserve to see me unravel. He arrived 5 minutes late, his boots scuffing the floor, his face rougher than I remembered, stubble creeping along his jaw, eyes shadowed. He wore a faded green jacket I'd once mended for him, and the sight of it stung, a reminder of the life I'd thought we shared. He sat across from me, hands clasped, and started to speak, but I raised a hand. "I'm talking first," I said, my voice low but firm. His mouth closed, and for the first time he looked small, like a man who'd run out of scripts. "Julian, you humiliated me in front of everyone I care about." I began, my fingers brushing the stone in my pocket. "You didn't just leave, you made sure I felt like nothing. But I'm not here to beg for answers or apologies. I'm here to tell you I'm moving forward, and you need to know what that means." I paused, watching his face. His eyes flickered not with anger, but with something like shame. I took a breath and slid a folder across the table, a plain manila one I'd prepared last night. Inside were copies of my prenatal records, an ultrasound image from my 12-week appointment, and a single-page outline of parental responsibilities, drafted with help from Ruth's friend, a retired social worker named Elaine. "I'm 14 weeks pregnant," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "This is your child. I'm not asking you to be my partner, but I'm giving you a chance to be a father if you can show up for it." Julian's face went slack, his hands dropping to the table. "Pregnant," he whispered, like the word was foreign. He reached for the folder, his fingers trembling, and opened it to the ultrasound. A blurry shape, a tiny heartbeat marked in white. His eyes glistened, but I didn't soften. I'd cried enough alone. "You don't get to walk back into my life like nothing happened," I continued. "This outline lays out visitation, financial support, and boundaries based on North Carolina law. Read it. Think about it. If you want to be involved, you'll need to prove it with actions, not words." I leaned forward, locking eyes. "I'm not the woman you left on that stage, Julian. I'm building a life for this baby, and I won't let anyone destabilize it, not even you." He sat back the folder, still open, his breath uneven. "Nora, I didn't know," he stammered. "I messed up. I was unhappy, but I didn't handle it right. Mara was—" I cut him off. "Mara's not my concern anymore. This is about you and the choice you're making now." He nodded, swallowing hard. And for a moment, I saw the man I'd loved, the one who'd carried tables for my festival, who'd kissed me under the stars. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who'd chosen cruelty over courage. "I'll read it," he said finally. "I want to be there, Nora. I just need time." "Time's not infinite," I said, standing. "Pregnancy moves fast. Let me know by next week, or I'll assume you're out." I left the folder with him and walked out the cafe door, chiming behind me. My heart was heavy, but it wasn't shaking. For the first time, I felt like I'd claimed the narrative, not just survived it. Back home, I found a package on my porch, no sender's name. Inside was a small hand-woven basket, the kind used for gathering herbs, with a note tucked inside. "For the gardens you'll grow, and the roots you're planting. Ruth." I smiled, tracing the basket's tight weave. It was practical, beautiful, a gift that saw me as I was now, not as I'd been. I set it on my kitchen counter next to my sketchbooks and felt a warmth I hadn't in weeks. That afternoon, I met Tessa at the community garden to check on the sunflowers. The stalks were browning, but their heavy heads still nodded in the breeze. "You faced him," Tessa said, not asking, just knowing. I nodded, pulling a weed from the soil. "It wasn't about winning. It was about deciding who I am." She grinned, tossing a clod of dirt at me. "That's my girl. Now tell me about this Ruth lady. She sounds like a badass." Ruth's influence was spreading not just in me, but in how I saw my future. At the next prenatal class, I shared a small piece of my story. Not the details, just the feeling of choosing myself. The other moms nodded, some tearing up, and Ruth gave me that quiet nod again. Afterward, she introduced me to Sam, a carpenter who volunteered at the community center. Sam was in his early 40s with a salt and pepper beard and a laugh that filled the room. He'd been raised by a single mom and now mentored kids in woodworking. "Heard you're designing a sensory garden," he said, wiping sawdust off his hands. "Need any raised beds? I can build them cheap." Sam's offer wasn't just about wood and nails. It was a bridge, a reminder that I didn't have to do this alone. We started meeting weekly to plan the garden, his practical questions. How high should the beds be? What's the soil mix, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected? He never pried, never flirted, just showed up with a thermos of coffee and a willingness to listen. One day, while we hammered stakes into the ground, he said, "You remind me of my mom. She used to say the hardest part of raising me wasn't the money, or the time, it was believing she was enough." I looked at him. My hammer paused. "Was she?" I asked. He smiled. "More than enough." Sam's words echoed Ruth's, and they carried me through the next week. When Julian emailed, "I've read the agreement. I'm in, but I need to discuss some details. Can we meet again with a mediator if you want?" I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened my sketchbook and drew the sensory garden, adding a small bench where I imagined sitting with my baby, listening to the rustle of herbs. I was still leading the story, but Julian was starting to catch up inch by inch. That evening, I took the root stone from my pocket, and placed it in the woven basket next to a sprig of lavender from the garden. I wasn't ready to forgive Julian, but I was ready to let him try, not for him, but for the baby. And maybe, just maybe, for the part of me that still believed people could grow. A year after the Crestwood Harvest Festival, I stood in the sensory garden I'd designed for the Asheville Community School, the late September sun, casting long shadows across the gravel path. The lavender was in full bloom, its scent mingling with the crisp air, and the lamb's ear plants felt like velvet under my fingers. My daughter Lila was 6 months old, strapped to my chest in a soft carrier, her tiny hands clutching a sprig of mint I'd given her to explore. She cooed her dark eyes wide, and I kissed her forehead, feeling a warmth that had once seemed impossible. The garden was finished, the raised bed Sam built, glowing under the afternoon light, a small plaque at the entrance, reading "Grow where you're planted." This was my home, my work, my heart rebuilt from the ground up. Lila's birth had been a marathon, 20 hours of labor at Mission Hospital. My body pushed to its limits, sweat-soaked and trembling. Tessa was there, gripping my hand, her voice steady through every contraction. "You're a damn warrior, Nora," she'd said, swapping out cold cloths for my forehead. Julian showed up when I was 8 centimeters dilated, carrying a small potted fern he'd bought at a nursery. It was a clumsy gesture, but I didn't send him away. He sat in the corner, silent, his eyes red-rimmed, when Lila's first cry filled the room. I didn't look at him when the nurse placed her on my chest, her skin warm and perfect. Lila was mine, and that was enough. The first month postpartum was a blur of sleepless nights and aching breasts, but I wasn't alone. Tessa brought soup and folded onesies. Ruth stopped by with herbal tea and stories of her own early motherhood, and Sam built a rocking chair for Lila's nursery, sanding it smooth in my driveway. Julian visited twice a week, as we'd agreed, bringing diapers and formula, asking careful questions about Lila's sleep and feeding. He didn't push to stay longer, didn't ask about us. Once, as he held Lila, I caught him staring at the fern pendant, now hanging on a hook by my desk, repurposed as a reminder of what I'd overcome. "You kept it," he said almost to himself. I nodded. "Not for you. For me." Julian had changed slowly. He'd found a steady job at a lumberyard in Hendersonville, not glamorous, but reliable. His support payments arrived on time, no strings attached, and he'd signed the parenting agreement after a single mediation session with Elaine. At Lila's 4-month checkup, we sat together in the pediatrician's waiting room, not speaking much. But when Lila got her shots and wailed, Julian scooped her up, humming softly until she calmed. "I'm here, little one," he whispered, and I didn't interrupt. I didn't trust him fully, but I believed he was trying for Lila, not for me. I hadn't seen Mara again, but I heard she'd moved to Charlotte. Her florist shop shuttered after a slow season. Tessa, ever the sleuth, showed me a post from Mara's Instagram, a vague apology about learning from mistakes. I didn't care. Mara was a footnote, a lesson in trusting my instincts. My energy was for Lila, for the garden, for the life I was building. Sam became a constant, not in a romantic way, but in a way that felt deeper, steadier. We'd meet at the community garden or the community center planning new projects, a pollinator patch, a kids' planting workshop. He'd bring Lila a tiny wooden rattle he'd carved, or share stories about his mom, who taught him to value quiet strength. One evening, as we sat on the sensory garden bench, Lila dozing against me, Sam said, "You've got this glow, Nora. Not the Instagram kind, the real kind. Like you know who you are." I smiled, the rootstone in my pocket, the woven basket now holding Lila's toys on my porch. "I'm getting there," I said. Tessa noticed it too. "You're not just surviving," she said one night, sprawled on my couch with a glass of sparkling water. "You're thriving. Look at this place." My duplex had transformed. Lila's nursery was painted sage green, a second-hand crib tucked under a mobile of felt leaves. My desk held sketches for new clients, and the kitchen counter had a jar of wildflowers Sam had dropped off. The fern pendant hung by my desk, not as a wound, but as a marker of growth. I'd started journaling again, small entries in a spiral notebook, not for Lila's future, but for my present. On my 35th birthday, I didn't plan a big event, no festival, no crowd. Instead, I invited the people who'd stayed, Tessa, Ruth, Sam, and Marcus, who'd driven up from Greenville. We gathered in my backyard, a small space I'd turned into a garden with raised beds and string lights. Tessa brought a homemade carrot cake, Ruth a jar of her chamomile tea, and Sam a children's book about plants inscribed to Lila's mom, who grows beauty everywhere. Marcus handed me a playlist he'd made, songs about resilience and new starts. Lila, in a tiny sweater, giggled as Tessa bounced her on her knee. The doorbell rang as we were cutting the cake. I opened it to find Julian holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. I didn't want to intrude, he said, his voice soft. Just wanted to drop this off for Lila. I nodded, letting him step inside for a moment. Lila squealed when she saw him, her arms flapping. He knelt to kiss her cheek, then handed me the package. "Happy birthday, Nora," he said, meeting my eyes. "You're an incredible mom." He left before I could respond, the door clicking shut. Inside the package was a small wooden frame, carved with a simple vine pattern, holding a photo of Lila from her 2-month checkup, her eyes bright. A note was tucked behind it. "For Lila's roots and yours. Thank you for giving me a chance." I didn't cry, didn't need to. I set the frame on my bookshelf next to the rootstone and the woven basket. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was peace. A recognition that Julian was part of Lila's story, not mine. That night, after everyone left, I sat in the nursery, Lila asleep in her crib, the soft glow of a moon-shaped lamp on the wall. My notebook was open, and I wrote, "Lila, you're my reason to grow, but I'm my reason to stay. The world can break you, but it can't keep you. Choose yourself always." I closed the notebook, slipped the rootstone into my pocket, and looked around. The fern pendant caught the light. The garden outside rustled in the breeze, and Lila's soft breaths filled the room. I wasn't the woman Julian had tried to erase. I was Nora, mother, designer, grower of roots, and I was enough. As I turned off the lamp, I thought of the sensory garden, its plaque gleaming under the stars. "Grow where you're planted." I had, and I would keep growing, not for anyone else, but because I deserved it.